Okay, as we were talking about a bit earlier, tough week for the Home Office and the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. She's been accused of bullying, and she's also having problems with some of the staff in her office, allegedly, and indeed plenty to chew through regarding this Windrush report, which the Times is reporting has been watered down using language like institutionally racist. So it's not been the best week for the Home Office. To talk through the claims against the department, we have Alex Thomas, Programme Director at the Institute for Government and former Principal Private Secretary to Sir Jeremy Heywood, the Cabinet Secretary and Head of the Civil Service, and James Dowling, former Special Advisor to David Gauke. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for coming in on a Friday night. A couple of big issues to talk about. Alex, I'll start with you. This row that's going on, or seemingly going on, between Priti Patel, the head of the Civil Service, what do you make of it? Is it just a continuation of similar battles we've seen before between Number 10 and the Civil Service, or is something new about this?
Well, it's not that unusual for secretaries of state to not always get on with their permanent secretaries and other civil servants. If you think about it, these people have been thrown together. They haven't recruited each other, and they're doing high-pressure jobs, and so inevitably there are some tensions. I mean, in the end, the civil service needs the confidence of ministers, and ministers need to treat civil servants with respect. And the real damaging thing, I think, about what's happened over the last couple of days is this spilling out in public. It's much better to try and resolve these things privately and maintain a unified team, and that way government works better, and government is hard enough at the best of times.
What do you make of this accusation, constant accusation of the civil service not helping their ministers, being problematic, getting in the way of the job?
I mean, I think, I would agree with Alex. I mean, I think that kind of fundamentally, if you want to deliver a program, well, ministers and civil servants need to work as a team, and so generally, I would take the view that it sounds like probably the relationship isn't quite what it could be. I don't want to get into kind of, don't want to start allocating blame, but it's got to this point. It's not going well. In general, that would suggest that probably there's a fair amount of blame on all sides. And I think particularly if you look at the Home Office, actually, I mean, you think about what happened to Amber Rudd. The Home Office is a department which has had its issues. Yeah. But it's got to be said. Ministers get the best out of their officials when officials are able to be candid with them about the advice they give.
Alex, how do you feel Mark Sedwill might be feeling reading the Times this week, and how much pressure might be on him to step in a more emphatic way, if the allegations around the bullying and the rows are true?
Well, it's really difficult, and it's a very difficult situation. Ultimately, these sorts of decisions are for the Cabinet Secretary and the top of the Civil Service to decide who does which jobs. And the overall responsibility for sorting this out is with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary and Head of the Civil Service. In the end, officials and civil servants will do what ministers say and will work to deliver what ministers want. It's reasonable for ministers then to have a conversation with the Cabinet Secretary or with the Prime Minister and say, actually, it's not quite working out. Can we think about how we can improve the situation? And ultimately, if relations really have broken down, then yes, it makes sense to move people around, but that should be a last resort, and it really shouldn't be litigated through the front page of the Times.
Moving on to the other big issue that's cropped up today, James, and the fact that there are accusations that this independent review into the Windrush scandal, according again to the Times, originally included the language that the Home Office was institutionally racist, and there are now accusations that language has been removed. What did you make of this story? Do you think there is a risk of interference with the Home Office and this independent review, or not?
I mean, it looked to me like what they'd done is got hold of an early draft of something which had some inflammatory language, possibly some unfortunate language, and have made a headline out of it. I'm not sure we necessarily need to read anything into it beyond that, to be honest. And I mean, again, not knowing the context, it's difficult for me to say specifically kind of what motivated the use of that language, or indeed what motivated the removal of it. But I think you're jumping kind of you're jumping well ahead of the available evidence when you suggest, for example, there's political interference in that. I mean, I think kind of what it suggests is there's a process of reviewing the documents, and some of the language has been
Yeah, and indeed the Home Office tonight as well, a spokesman saying that this is an independent review being led by Wendy Williams, who's the HM Inspector of Constabulary. Alex, you're nodding along with that as well. You think it's going too far at this stage?
I think that is going too far. The report suggested this hadn't even gone to ministers yet, so I think suggesting political interference is wrong. It's not unusual for, even in the most independent of reports, for there to be a bit of back and forth between government officials and the review team to make sure that the facts are right. There's this marvellous term Maxwellisation, which means that people who are mentioned in a report get the chance to check that what's being said about them is fair and reasonable and to have a chance to object. So that's probably what's going on here. Clearly the phrase institutional racism has a resonance after the Lawrence Macpherson report and case, the officials will know that has that kind of resonance, and they'll want to make sure that it really is justified by the evidence. It feels like a sort of slightly less exciting thing that's going on here, and a fairly normal part of the process.
Okay, I want to move on because you both have such good experience, of working behind the scenes in government and the civil service. To Boris Johnson's week, we've talked about Priti Patel. He hasn't really been seen, and he's been criticised for it, not going to flood-hit communities. Sending out a few tweets seems to have been all he's done this week. I mean, when we talk about the floods, I was struck by something someone who lives up in Yorkshire said to Sky News yesterday, which was, "I supported you, Boris, now come and show me some support." James, is it important that the Prime Minister is seen to be out and speaking to people at times like this?
I think it's important the Prime Minister is seen to be representing the government, but what I would say is I don't think stylistically this is a particular change from what we've seen previously with this Prime Minister. I mean, this has been, right back to July, a pretty tumultuous time in British politics, and it's been a government that has had a serious appetite for controversy throughout, and the Prime Minister hasn't necessarily come out.
What do you think the reason for that might be?
I think it's stylistic. Actually, I don't think it's cowardice. I think probably it's a particular view about how they want to handle their media relations, and it's a particular view about how they want to put their key people. So, in the case of the flooding, it will be George Eustace. In the case of Windrush, or it's Priti Patel. But it's a view about how they want to deploy their key spokesman, and when they want to bring in someone who is a much bigger gun who will actually kind of elevate the issue, the Prime Minister.
Okay. Do you think, Alex, what do you think? Is it important, or do we make too much of it, the fact that he isn't turning up?
The Prime Minister is the leader. It's his judgment as to when he wants to engage. They've clearly, I do agree with James saying that they will have taken that judgment that they want to push Secretaries of State and other ministers forward. Equally, I completely understand why people in flood-hit areas want to see the top guy. It's a political judgment. It's a media judgment. Yes, we probably do get overexcited about it.
Is part of that judgment worried about heckling and things like that? To be quite frank.
It may be, but equally, there's also sort of pushing other ministers forward. I think it's you pays your money, you takes your choice on that one. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would associate myself with that. I mean, I do think there is a deliberate decision on the part of this government to let individual ministers who they trust, who are responsible for individual areas, to front run a bit more with the media. So this isn't like a kind of Tony Blair style ministry where actually he was very much the face of the government. And I think it would be. We'll see how it develops. But
I was going to say, we'll see if the strategy works in the long run.
Well, that's the test, isn't it?
Indeed.
And,
We'll leave it there, gentlemen. Alex Thomas, James Dowling, thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate your time.